Good morning and welcome to Glenwood Lutheran Church. My name is Pastor Mark Manning, and we gather here for my vlog this week, in the next to last week of the what feels like summer for us, next to last week of August. And as we do so, keep in mind, I this will be my next to last vlog. Next week, I will have a closing message for you as I retire on September 1st. And I've had a good time doing so many of these for you, and being able to bring new or interesting things to bear in your faith life. Today, I want to talk to you a little bit about something that comes up in our letter to the Hebrews, our New Testament letter to the Hebrews this weekend. There are two references, one very familiar to you, another that you've heard, and hopefully I can bring a little bit of comparison and contrast to them. The two references in the letter to the Hebrews are a reference to what we would call Mount Sinai, although it's never specifically named that in the letter, because it's a letter to the Hebrews, and they knew all of these things about the story of the Old Testament, just as a passing reference. They would go, aha, that they're talking about Mount Sinai. Now, the other reference is to Zion, and that can mean a number of different things, and I'm going to try to do some explaining in there. Of course, Mount Sinai is the place that three religions place a very, very significant event in the religious life and religious understanding. The name of the mountain is, we say Mount Sinai, it's also known as Jebel Musa. And those who are of the Abrahamic tradition, namely Muslim and Christian and Jews, trace this particular place to the giving of the law by God to Moses. Moses and the Ten Commandments, this story. It's a mountain that's 7,497 feet high. It's not the tallest mountain around there. It's surrounded by higher peaks. In fact, the highest peak in the Sinai Peninsula, the highest peak in all of Egypt, in fact, is Mount Catherine, which is just to the south and west of it, and that's 8,625 feet. So it's almost 1,500 or 1,200 feet higher than it. So it's noticeably larger, and yet this place is considered the place where God, although it gives them though there's no, there's no definitive proof that this is the case. It's widely regarded by these three different traditions as the place that God meets Moses and gives the law, and then Moses goes down to the people who are camped down below and gives them the law. It's a place of God's power and God's presence, with Moses as a mediator, bringing it to the people who then live this law out. In modern times, more modern times, there is, in fact, on the summit of this mountain, Mount Sinai or Jebel Musa, there is a small mosque and a small Orthodox chapel. And then down below, in somewhat lower down, lower elevation, there is a monastery, St. Catherine's Monastery. It dates all the way back to the 6th century. So this site, this area has been regarded as special and holy for some time. You can ascend, you can climb Jebel Musa, Mount Sinai. There is what's called the long shallow pathway, which is a 2.5-hour walk to get there. Or you can take what's called the short steep pathway, which is 3,750 steps, otherwise known as the steps of penance. And if you do it, you'll understand why it involves penance. Anyway, many pilgrims who come to this area choose one of those two ways to reach the top of it. Now, in contrast, and the author of Hebrews contrasts this presence of God, just to Moses, who is a mediator and who brings not only fear and judgment, but law to the people. The author of Hebrews contrasts this with Mount Zion. Mount Zion. Mount Zion is, of course, in Jerusalem, the Jerusalem area, and it's associated with the people of Israel, but it's also associated with Jesus. And in Hebrews, it's given a symbolic presence. In the letter to the Hebrews, it's given a symbolic presence. Here you have a real Mount Sinai that God gave the law on, but on Mount Zion, something else has happened. And no longer do we have a far off God, fearful God, but rather we have the presence of God in the person of Jesus. And not in the law, but also but by the presence of Jesus and the comfort and the care and the sacrifice of Jesus out of love for people. Mount Zion has variously been stood for the city of David, Jerusalem, the lower city specifically in very, very ancient times. The lower city of David that was established by King David in the Hebrew Bible. And then later on, to the north, higher up a little bit, up this rib that Jerusalem lays on, it becomes associated with the Temple Mount and the temple platform and Solomon's temple. And here you have then the city of Jerusalem established and walls there, but yet later on, by the time we reach the Christian era, the idea of what Mount Zion is has shifted somewhat. And now it is outside of the city walls to the west, and there's a spur of rock running out there that's taller yet than the lower city of original Jerusalem, taller yet also than the Temple Mount. And it's shifted, and this is the place where often there is many Christian sites of pilgrimage. It says this is the place where reputedly the Last Supper was, and where Jesus and Peter, and Peter heard the cock crow after he denied Jesus, and all sorts of stuff like that. And so it's associated more so with Christ in a Christian tradition, rather than the Jews would still hold the holy city and the Temple Mount there to be Mount Zion. But there are ways of talking and contrasting the way that we talk about the old covenant of the law and Moses as an intermediary, and the new covenant of Jesus as the Son of God, come for the grace and the salvation of the entire world. Well, hope you've learned something when you hear Mount Sinai, or when you heard Mount Zion. You think a little bit about what's being said.